Hi everyone. So I've often been asked how I got started with EFT and matrix reimprinting. So in the previous chapter of my life, I was an academic in the field of education. I was an academic by day, but by night, in any spare time I had, I was really engaged in meditation. I was engaged in any kind of energy work, learning and practicing with the chakras, the energy centers, and really looking for practices, energetic and spiritual practices that would help me to expand my consciousness and evolve basically as a human being. That was my interest, and that's why I was also attracted to education, because for me education is empowerment. However, I was living a very different reality, and these two parts of me felt very separate. But at some point, I realized as an academic that I was dealing with several unwanted patterns. I had a lot of fears, and I had strong reactions to things, like reactions that were from a place of suffering. So I started to look more deeply into, instead of running away from all of those things, how could I start to address them, because they were really crippling my life. That's what fear does, and anxiety and insomnia and all of these. I had several small health issues that pointed towards someone who was extremely stressed. And I knew that it was only going to get worse, because that's what happens when we hold a lot of suffering in our life, basically, when we haven't processed negative experiences or traumas in our life. It has a huge impact on our health, yeah? Because all these chemicals are released into our body, and our body starts to send us all these aches and pains and little illnesses until they become big illnesses, until we start to pay attention and make changes towards the way we think and feel about ourselves and the world around us. So it reached a point where I was quite desperate, and then made it a priority, especially when I left the UK as an academic and moved to Lebanon, to really go more deeply into my healing journey. I just started to pursue different healing paths. And it really put me on an extraordinary journey of self-discovery. And I was really inspired. And because of the very good results that I got, I realized, like, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to help people to heal their traumas, transform their fears, and empower themselves. So I remember that I was trying to set up a business. Early on, I had some ideas, and I actually encountered a business coach and who was using the technique of EFT. So when I was describing some of the ideas that I was having, but I was too scared to pursue them, the reason why I was too scared to pursue them was I was afraid of being disappointed. And as I was tapping, on a key point like the wrist, I was tapping and talking about it, I got really emotional. It surprised me how emotional I was talking about it. And the reason why I would be tapping on one of the EFT points, this one or this one or this one, any of these key points, is to help you tune into your body and not stay in the mind, like the story that you're just telling, to really tune into how your body is feeling. So I was super surprised by all the emotions that came out. And she's like, before you start planning and strategizing and all of that, she's like, you're sitting on a lot of limiting beliefs. And I really recommend that, that you work on these limiting beliefs. So we proceeded to do some tapping on just feeling disappointed if I did this or if I did that, and that's why I don't want to do them. And as we were tapping, a memory came up from childhood. And this is the beauty of tapping. It awakens your subconsciousness and allows the unprocessed suffering and hurt to actually resurface, come to the surface for you to look at them and deal with them. And the image I had was when I was like 10 years old, and the school told me at the end of the year that I couldn't come back to the school. They were basically expelling me from the school, and they were telling my parents, I was in the meeting with them, that I had failed academically, that I'm not up to the level academically, and therefore I also have behavioral issues in the classroom, and that I'm just too slow. I can't keep up with everyone. And they told my parents not to expect me to graduate from high school, and that I should be in a special school with other kids who have special needs. And I remember looking at my parents, and I just remembered the look of disappointment in my parents, and I just felt that disappointment, and I just felt also so disappointed in myself. I really felt like I had failed. Thankfully, my parents were really aware, and they only half believed, those teachers and the principal. They decided to try me in one more school that took a more holistic approach to the child. And in that school, I blossomed and did really well academically, as well as all the other activities that I was doing, because it mattered, not just academics. In my old school, it was either you were academically successful or you were a loser and a failure. That's what mattered. And I was someone who had a lot of different talents, like all children, and that wasn't recognized. So in this new school, all my different talents were celebrated. And so by the time at some point, I decided like, oh, I was ready to do well at school, even though I needed to catch up big time. But it happened. I did it. And I went on to attend 2 Ivy League schools in the US, like Brown and Harvard, and then went to Cambridge to get my PhD. And I always think like I should send those teachers and that principal a postcard, because they could have really ruined a child's life, and that's how much power teachers and educators have. And that's why I went into education and specifically worked with children and kids in Lebanon who had been expelled from all the other schools. And the school was willing to use a more innovative approach. And it was the most inspiring experience I've ever had in my life, working with young people. And 27 years later, I'm still in touch with so many of those students. So less than 27 years later, I would say 20 years later, I'm not that old, 20 years later, I'm still in touch with many of those students. The thing is, no matter how high I rose on the academic ladder, getting a PhD from Cambridge, I still had the ghost of disappointment and failure following me wherever I went. And it just made me very scared to try anything. It made me very scared of criticism. I felt I was constantly judging myself. There are several reasons why I was feeling that way, but it was interesting when I did the tapping, that scene at school came up. And so I saw my younger self totally mortified by that whole conversation happening and feeling so disappointed. And in that process, we shifted from EFT tapping to matrix reimprinting, which means you work with your younger self in a very direct way through a very beautiful process. And I'm tapping on my younger self and listening to what the younger Lena needs, how she's feeling, and what needs to happen for her to find her power again, to feel safe again. So it took me through an incredible process. And we ended with a reimprinting my subconscious mind with the new empowered beliefs that I'm smart, I'm capable, and I'm excited to try new things. And that really changed my life because of what followed afterwards. So it's because of that was the starting point of my experience of EFT. Interestingly, perhaps 2 years before, I had also encountered EFT when I was trying to develop my work again. And someone was just telling me to do some tapping, and I hadn't looked at tapping very carefully. So I started tapping and I had no idea what I was doing. And I concluded, oh, this technique is useless, doesn't do anything. And and just dropped the whole thing. And I thought it was so interesting that like a year and a half later, again, so unexpectedly, I encountered EFT and then decided to study it more carefully and saw that it's academically backed up. There's a lot of science behind EFT, and that mattered to me because of my academic background. So there have been well over 150 studies in peer-reviewed journals that have been published on the benefits of EFT and comparing EFT to the other modalities, especially the talking therapies and EMDR, the rapid eye movement, which had the same results as EFT and the same long-term results, because that's what you want. So that was really the beginning of my healing journey, basically, was confronting the disappointment I had and my fear of failure. And that opened the door for me to address a lot of things that I was still carrying. The other major thing I needed to work on was I was in Lebanon in 2006 when Israel invaded Lebanon by air, by land, and by sea, and it was really traumatizing for me in Lebanon. I just saw the whole country like crumble just like that. And I had to work on that because I just felt the world was an unsafe place. And here I was in my late 20s when that happened. And when I started to work on that and all my fears and anger also towards people that I thought were responsible for what had happened, for that war, it took me back to when I was born. So I was born in Lebanon, but at 6 months old, my family decided to flee Lebanon. They migrated from Lebanon and went to Greece, and Greece opened their doors to Lebanese and Palestinians to settle. And that's where I was raised, and actually a peaceful country. But when I was doing the tapping, I saw myself as a few months old. So I was born when there was a war in Lebanon and the first few months, and all the fear that I felt from everybody around me, all that uncertainty, that feeling that the world is an unsafe place and anything bad can happen, and the world is an unjust place because so many innocent people got killed and hurt in the civil war of Lebanon. So it took me to that, and then from that I went to other traumatic experiences I had, and the whole journey has been so inspiring for me. And yes, I can put trauma and inspiring and joy in the same sentence. Normally we don't do that. Normally when we talk about our traumas, it just brings up this pity or sense of victimization. But when you work through it using a mind-body approach like EFT and matrix reimprinting, you reconnect with an inner sense of peace. You connect with joy. It's almost like you're removing old clothing that you don't need anymore, like an old coat. And what's left is your light. And that's what I bring into the world. People are always surprised when I talk about some of the difficult experiences that I've had because I don't look like it at all. And the reason is because it's old clothing that I was able to remove and take the wisdom from what I experienced and to use it as a springboard for me to fulfill my own mission and my own potential. So the work continues. It's not because I've worked on a couple of things, that's it. It's a constant work on myself, but it's empowering, it's joyful, and I'm constantly in a gratitude for my life and where I am in my life, and I appreciate all the experiences that have shaped my life. So if you're feeling like you want to also experience the same thing, you also don't want to be carrying around these old coats that they no longer serve you, and yet you want to draw from the wisdom because they've made you who you are today, then just get in touch with me to know more. Have a blessed day.